Artichokey, artichokey. How are we doing today? We had talked about exploring conversation around the cycles of life and death, and especially during this time of experiencing a global pandemic. And we've also talked about how it is that we emanate and the energies that we are. So I particularly have experienced a lot of death in my life. I'm actually going through a death right now, a layer of my ego, and I've experienced a lot of deaths. And this one in particular is evolving around the word expire and expiration. And so there's this like deep desire for me to document and share a lot of the things in my creations. And so that when I expire, at least this version of me expires, it's left, like there's a timestamp left, and hopes that the work continues, or at least, you know, someone can pick up and see how it evolves within them. And, you know, going through this transition, I wouldn't call it a transformation, but really a transition, as I see my image go in and out of, like, you know, green life form and human form. You know, I've been really holding space for a lot of people that are dying in hospitals, and I think about them a lot. You know, when they're admitted into a hospital, that they're not able to have the visitors that they typically would have. You know, loved ones can't just pop by and drop off a meal or flowers or balloons. So they're more or less doing it on their own, and the only way that they can reach their loved ones is via text or phone call. And so these health professionals and hospice care and caregivers play other and new roles that actually extend like what their original role and responsibility is. And then with that, when a person does transpire into like leaving this human life, the rituals around celebrating life and death is so different right now. Like, one thing I really love about Irish traditions is that they do Irish wakes. And so they drink and they sing and they dance and they share all these amazing stories. And I love that. I love about the togetherness and getting together with loved ones, and then like sharing like the most random, inspiring, like, oh, and you get to know about someone who's passed on so much more. Like, oh, I had no idea. But now these days, it's like we're grieving alone and not together, or we are together, but separately. And even the rituals are coming together for like funerals and such. It's like, did you know that if a person enters a funeral home or a cemetery or whatnot and it's indoor, they have to sign off that they've been traced? So at least if there was an influx of infection of the COVID virus, that they can trace it back, that this is where the source came from. And so, you know, it's like, how do we really grieve? How can we grieve? And how can we make it new so that we can hold space for people who are experiencing loss? This is a new experience for me, and I really just wanted to put that out there. And I think the first time like we had brought this up, I said, you know, like, Mother Nature, she's amazing. And, you know, she's just trying to live and thrive and survive. And she's happy to share this space with us. And so in many ways, like, I like that she gets the chance to breathe, finally, you know, because we're more in place, we're more stable, focusing internally, and more putting attention to her. She has this balance that only she knows about. And so I honor in these ways that as though it is like very much filled with loss and sorrow, I also respect her plan. Yeah, that's where I am at. And I wanted to share that with y'all.
Thank you. Yeah, there's something about this whole situation that it kind of takes away the humanity from all of those transitions, you know. Everything that you just mentioned about the details of passing in the hospital right now, it's just very scary because I think so many of us are already so separated from death. Like, there's like this like hygiene thing that happens. If you get sick, you go to the doctor, and if you're really, really sick, then you go to the hospital, and then you might die there, and then like what even happens to you? You know, and I think they're like all the media around, gosh, just like the refrigerator trucks, like the way that like the body becomes this weird commodity of the failure of the health system, then it's like this disposability factor, right? Like, I mean, we were just talking earlier about getting boba. And I was like, gosh, it's just also so disposable. The plastic is disposable. Everything is so disposable. And so when it comes to these kind of situations where like there is mass death and it can't be acknowledged in the way that it usually is, it just becomes part of this system that seems like really scary, like in the system that in which we're living in right now. Because I imagine like here in Hawaii, there was like 90% or a little over 90% of the population died from disease, like from when the, you know, and this happened in a lot of different places, but when COVID first started coming up, it was like people were referring back to that time, like in the 1800s, the late 1700s, when there was massive death on a large scale and what that was like. But it, you know, at the same time, there probably were different protocols for like handling bodies. I mean, all of these extremely contagious diseases have happened in the past. We don't know what that's like. And I feel like the history of what that was like has not been translated to us. There are stories. I remember my grandmother told me when there was like smallpox in the Philippines that her grandfather made them eat monkey brains. And she was like, that was like the cure for the smallpox. I mean, if it's, you know, like that they just had to do something that to protect themselves from that sickness that was like illness, causing so much illness around them. So I feel like we have these sort of like ancestral ways that people have dealt with stuff like this, but because we're so separated from that, and this is such a unique virus situation that also has to do with some of the ways that we've been treating the world and the planet and Pachamama in general, that it's like a new version of this thing that has also happened in the past, but we're just disassociated from it, or disassociated from the ways in which our ancestors were managing it. And it's very disconcerting. But like you said, Lay, like you have to sort of just trust that something is making this happen in a certain way, or that like what are we learning from this? Yeah, those are just kind of rambly thoughts, but that's kind of what came to me. Yeah, it's like almost like trusting, like we've put our trust more in the medical industry in this current moment. And I think that's a corrupt, broken, busted ass fucking system that I don't think is truly offering us its support in the way that medicine, the medicine of our ancestors maybe did. So it's kind of like, how do you support your own health and immunity and body and everything when yeah, it's just hard to trust those things that we've also been sort of trained to trust.
I think there's this codependent relationship that many humans on this planet have with pharma, big pharma. Like earlier this year, my dog passed away in January, and he had a heart condition. And so the last time he had his last vet visit, I could tell the vet was like giving me this eye contact of like, his heart rate's going down and it's time to prepare. And I was like, okay, I've seen this time coming. And so I asked, like, where did this come from? And he says, well, there are some lingering side effects from taking heart medication, which is what my dog was on for several years, with like supplements and things like that. And so I said, well, what if I did not give that medication to my dog? He's like, well, then you may have probably lost him a lot sooner. So there's like this balance sometimes with like medication, But I do like the fact that we're talking about using indigenous ancestral practices, coming back to what the earth offers, you know, really embracing that everything is medicine, you know, even our relationship with how we exist. And as I say this, you know, I'm holding these two stones that I've been working with for some weeks, and I've been just doing that and really just like reminding myself, like, how long has it taken for this object in my hands to be what it is, for me to hold it in my hands. And so when I'm being taught like that these stones are my ancestors because they're the keepers of time, it blows my mind. So why am I not turning to my ancestors and the things that my ancestors have done? And I know I'm doing that, but when I say that, I speak that more generally for the human population. They don't see big pharma and medical, and I say medical in quotations. I think medicine is medicine as far as like science is incredible. It's so useful. It's an incredible tool. It's not always the answer. Not that I know what the answer is. I'm just saying I don't think it's. And me too, my ramblings. But I think this is all part of exploring life and death and the beautiful cycles and this dance, and to not be in fear. I think that's my main point in bringing up this conversation, is to not be in fear, and that hopefully when we resurface, that we can have our first breath of air into this lifetime smiling as opposed to crying. Because when we leave this life, we're crying for the most part. And when we enter this lifetime, we're crying. So can we enter and leave our life in smile and joy without fear?
Feels important to mention that I think a lot of what you're saying sounds inspired by Olivia's class, Olivia Chumacero.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
it feels important to call in the names of our teachers. Olivia teaching us that the rocks, see if they can come through. The rocks are keepers of time. And that they're medicine, our relationship with them is medicine, that they breathe. And thank you for bringing in those teachings right now. And sometimes it's hard for me to relate, I think, to conversations of death maybe that I hear, because I don't feel like I fear death, or I don't feel like it's bad, and I know that for me the earth is experiencing COVID because humans need to depopulate, and it's maddening that that is affecting disproportionately communities that are in poverty, and communities that don't have access to land, and communities that have been violently cut off from their ancestral knowledges through either the slave trade or colonization here in the Americas. Because absolutely, like, you know, it can be a both and. Like, it's not like we have to completely stop taking Western medication or like stop going to a surgeon for surgery, because that's so helpful and useful for sure. But I think we can like slowly transition little medications in our lives, or in our loved ones' lives, suggesting little things like, instead of Tylenol, for example, chew on some willow bark, or instead of Advil for cramps, drink some chamomile tea, you know, or pineapple weed, stuff like that. Like baby steps to get more in touch with the medicine growing underneath us. And like, I think of Dong Yi taking this amazing herbalist apprenticeship too, of just like learning how to forage for medicine, and what the medicine that's appearing in our neighborhood is appearing for, and like why it's there, whether it's a weed or native plant. And then growing our ancestral medicine too. And I thought it could be fun to kind of name like how we want to transition, you know, like when it's that time, or like how we want to experience our loved ones transitioning. And that seems weird to think about, but like you're talking about with joy, like there's so much to be mad about, but I know that because our words are spells, we have to, just as much as we're complaining, we have to be naming what we want and like what we want to see, and calling that in just as powerfully as our voice and our breath is like describing what we don't like, you know, like it's kind of that both and dance as well of like, okay, describe what we don't like, what we're seeing, and then naming like, okay, I want to transition in this mushroom bodysuit bag that can decompose with me.
Yeah.
I love those specific suggestions too. Willow bark, pineapple wheat, maybe a big glass of water. Delicious, nourishing water.
Agua.
So cleansing, so purifying.
One thing I've learned from alien matter is to be drinking warm water.
Oh, that's good.
And that's according to knowledge from traditional Chinese medicine.
Like tepid or like warm?
What's tepid?
Kind of like room temperature.
I would prefer warm, like slightly above, just so that what I learned is that warm water, especially if you drink it in the morning, will activate your organs. And just like how when I think about how like when the air is warmer, the molecules are going faster, so it's like activating, and when it's cold it slows down. So I imagine that functioning for my body when there's warm water, I'm really getting my body started.
Crank
And
it up.
it feels so good.
I like that.
Instead of contraction, it's the like open.
Loosen it up.
Oh yeah, the other thing is, which I still can't get my body to do, is to poop first thing in the morning.
Woo.
I don't know if any of you here have achieved that bodily. I'm still working on it.
That's hilarious.
Like to detox first thing in the morning, let it, whatever you were digesting the night before, out, so that you can get a fresh start.
You're not a morning pooper?